Ever since Bohemian Rhapsody made all the money in the world, musical biopics have been on an uptick. That said, it's pretty hard to find surprise in any of these movies. I mean, I'm pretty sure the comic book movie genre is diversifying more than these movies. A lot of times, musical biopics play like a Wikipedia page put to the screen, lacking any genuine narrative structure and at best skimming the characters' flaws and at worst completely ignoring them. You tend to not be able to use the music from these musicians without involving the estate, and when you involve the estate, it's hard to get something that feels like a genuine warts and all look at these artists. Instead, you get a propaganda piece, a product that exists not to tell a genuinely compelling story, but to give these artists another surge in streams. Because of that, these movies tend to not lead to much complicated feelings. You know exactly what you're gonna get before you step into the theater. More than any recent musical biopic, the Michael Jackson biopic Michael is especially complicated. The once universally celebrated Michael Jackson has now become a polarizing figure, especially in the light of the relatively recently released Leaving Neverland documentary, which brought back all the criminal allegations against Michael Jackson into the public conscience. If you're as terminally online as I am on the internet, opinions on the man are definitely divided. Was he a wrongfully accused musical genius? Was he a monster of a man whose music should be banished away for the rest of eternity? Was he an evil man who also still happened to be incredibly musically gifted? Opinions definitely vary. Though the biopic originally sought to explore these allegations, a little bit of a whoopsie happened where they made this movie and didn't realize they were legally barred from portraying one of Michael Jackson's accusers until filming Wrapped, which meant they had to reshoot this movie, remove anything to deal with the allegations, and essentially only cover the first half of Michael's career. It leaves you with a movie that celebrates the man's musical talent without reckoning with the flaws that border on potentially monstrous. And because of that, it's safe to say that your feelings about this movie will essentially mirror your feelings about Michael Jackson as a man. If you still enjoy Off the Wall and still think that Michael Jackson is one of the greatest musical talents put on this planet, you will have a blast with this movie, enjoying all of the recreations of popular Michael Jackson moments and grooving to some of the best music you've heard in your life. If you believe that Michael Jackson was a complete creep whose legacy should be retroactively reprimanded, then this movie is gonna feel a lot to you like how you would feel if you watched an O.J. Simpson movie that focused only on his football career. Me, I fall somewhere in the middle. Michael Jackson is a pretty special figure to me as a musical performer and an icon. His music alone is something I still listen to today, and if you take another look at my username, you will see that we both share the same name, and that's not by coincidence. That said, my feelings about the man, separate from his music, are more complicated. Where there's smoke, there tends to be fire, and though there was never anything explicitly proved in terms of fire here, there was definitely a lot of smoke when it comes to the man. And since I grapple back and forth between these conflicting Michael Jackson opinions, so too does my incredibly conflicted feelings toward this movie. As an experiential event, I gotta say, this is some of the most fun I've had in the theater so far this year. Michael Jackson's music was obviously an instrumental part of my childhood, and when you have Jafar Jackson at the forefront as the spitting image of his uncle, bringing to life his musical greatness in such finite attention to detail, it's hard not to feel like the king of pop has been resurrected right in front of you. But as someone who holds conflicting opinions about Michael Jackson the individual, I found this movie narratively and emotionally frustrating. If you've heard anyone describe this movie as essentially a greatest hits album put to the big screen, I'm here to tell you they're wrong. The movie does track the emotional thread of the relationship between Michael Jackson and his notoriously exacting father Joe Jackson, played brilliantly by Coleman Domingo, who is low-key becoming one of my favorite guys in this business. But while the movie does try to track an emotional arc, it does feel very much like the too long didn't read version of it. And though it does track an arc, that arc portrays Michael as a do-gooding angel whose flaws only include things like self-consciousness. You know, the kind of flaws you say when the job interview asks you what's your greatest weakness and you tell them, well, sometimes I spend too long on trying to do things right. I mean, even if you don't think there's any hard evidence that Michael Jackson did anything sexually explicit with kids, we can all agree he at least acted uncomfortably around them, sharing beds and whatnot, which no grown man should. And this movie doesn't even attempt to reckon with that. In fact, there are a lot of scenes which show him as just how gracious and kind he was with kids, and seeing that on screen made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Even if we put aside all of the allegations, the way it explores his relationship with his father is incredibly surface level. I'm not denying that Joe Jackson was an incredibly bad man, but this movie straight up portrays him as a cartoon villain. He's one puppy kicking scene away from being straight up mustache twirling. I mean, would it have killed them to include even one scene of him being a decent father? Maybe sharing a moment of laughter with his sons? Maybe just anything? No, it is way too much for this movie, which would much rather portray him as a mustache twirling boogeyman. That should tell you a lot about how every single aspect of this movie emotionally and narratively is treated. We get a little bit of Michael Jackson and his father, but we barely scratch the surface. We get a little bit of MJ and his mother, but we barely scratch the surface. We get a little bit of the making of Thriller, but we barely scratch the surface. Jafar Jackson does an uncanny impression of the icon, but he barely scratches the surface of MJ the man. If you look at something like Michael Fassbender in Steve Jobs or Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer, I would argue that neither of those felt like straight up reincarnations of the individual they were playing. But I would say they were better performances because of it. Cillian Murphy talked about how he couldn't find any intimate home life footage of Oppenheimer, so he had to reverse engineer what this guy was like behind closed doors, away from public speaking. And because of that, we get a fully realized portrait in Oppenheimer. Not of an icon or a destroyer of worlds, but of a man. Whereas Jafar Jackson in this movie speaks at the exact same falsetto that Michael Jackson spoke in all of his public appearances, rendering his performance like 2 hours of Michael Jackson in interview mode. I might even argue that Giuliano Valdi, who plays the younger MJ, gave a better performance. Because there's not as much footage to draw from young Michael Jackson speaking, he was really allowed to make the character more of his own. And in a sense, Jafar's performance ends up being a great metaphor for the movie as a whole. An entertaining, riveting, hard to look away from imitation, but one that feels pretty hollow on the inside. As someone who can still get down to Michael Jackson's music while having complicated feelings toward Michael Jackson the person, I had a blast with much of the musical sections in this movie while feeling very emotionally and narratively unfulfilled. And for that, I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for weekly TV and movie reviews. And if you had the chance to watch Michael, hop in the comments and let us know what you thought about it. I am Cinemike, and I'll see you next time.